Pam Bondi, the US Attorney General, is sitting on a mountain of secrets. Buried in those secrets? A trail of nearly $1.1 billion linked to Jeffrey Epstein's bank account. Billion, not million. And when a US senator shouted for the Department of Justice to follow that money,
we're talking about well over 4,000 wire transfers.
The response wasn't openness. It was silence, redactions, and frustration. This isn't just about Epstein anymore. It's about who helped him hide his financial web and why the people in power don't want us to see the whole picture. Let's start with a number that's been haunting headlines: $1.08 billion.
4,725 wire transfers. Let me repeat that. 4,725 wire transfers, adding up to nearly $1.1 billion flowing in and out of just one of Mr. Epstein's bank accounts. If you ask me,
that's the number pulled from Treasury Department files on Epstein. Senator Ron Wyden revealed on the Senate floor that these records show 4,725 wire transfers connected to Epstein's accounts between 2003 and 2019. Think about that. Thousands of wires flowing through one man's bank account. A man who wasn't running a major company, wasn't a hedge fund genius, and had already been branded a sex offender. Yet money continued to flow in and out of his accounts like clockwork. That alone should have triggered alarms at the biggest banks in America.
For the last 3 years, his office has been looking into Epstein's financial network. They found that filings by 4 big banks flagged more than $1.5 billion in transactions, including thousands of wire transfers for the purchase and sale of artwork for rich friends. Then there were fees paid to Epstein by wealthy individuals and payments to numerous women around the world.
And those banks knew. Suspicious activity reports, known as SARs, were filed years later. In some cases, payments worth hundreds of millions weren't flagged until 7 years after the fact. Banks like JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank, and Bank of America all had ties to Epstein's finances. Wyden's warning was simple. Follow the money and you'll find out how Epstein was able to fund his empire of abuse long after the world already knew who he was. But here's where the story takes its sharp turn. Those files weren't just sitting on some dusty shelf. They landed directly with the Justice Department. And the Attorney General at the center of it all? Pam Bondi. She promised transparency. She promised to release the so-called Epstein files. And earlier this year, she made good, sort of. What came out was labeled Phase 1 of the release. At first glance, it looked explosive. Flight logs, contact books, list of seized evidence, albums, and devices taken from Epstein's mansions. But when reporters and lawmakers dug in, frustration set in fast. So much of it was already heavily redacted. Pages and pages of black ink where names, numbers, and details should have been. Victims said the documents told them nothing new. Journalists noted that most of it was already public or leaked years earlier. Instead of answers, the release raised even more questions.
Was transacting in Eastern Europe and Russia. Some of that appears to have been involved with sex trafficking, but it also could have been involved with tax shelters or money laundering. We don't fully know, and I think that's why Ron Wyden is onto this. And again, let's remember that during the 2016 campaign, Donald Trump was actively pursuing a real estate deal in Moscow.
And at the top of the list was this: where are the financial records? Where is the roadmap to those $1.1 billion in transfers? Because those documents exist. Treasury tracked them, Wyden read them, and yet the public saw none of it. This is why Wyden went public with his 7 demands, a kind of step-by-step guide for the DOJ to do what it should have been doing all along. He wanted subpoenas for the banks. He wanted to depose of the relationship managers who kept Epstein's accounts alive. He wanted the DOJ to crack open deals like the one in the Virgin Islands, where billionaire Leon Black quietly bought himself immunity for $62.5 million after paying Epstein $170 million for advice. Advice. Let that word sink in. $170 million for advice from a man who wasn't even a licensed accountant. Wyden's point was clear. These weren't just payments. They were possible cover for something darker. And it wasn't just American banks. The Treasury file showed Epstein moved hundreds of millions through Russian banks that today sit on US sanctions list. Combine that with Epstein's trafficking network and the allegations of moving women across borders, and suddenly those wires don't just look suspicious. They look like potential evidence of international crime. Yet, once again, the details remain locked away. Now, Pam Bondi insists her office is being careful. The DOJ has said it must protect victim privacy, that some redactions are necessary, and that there's no incriminating client list sitting in a drawer somewhere. In July, the DOJ even put out a statement claiming it found no credible evidence of Epstein blackmailing powerful people. No list, no smoking gun. But here's the thing, nobody was asking for a Hollywood-style blackmail list. They were asking for financial truth, for the receipts, for the paper trail that shows where Epstein got his money and how so many institutions let him move it around with impunity. So when Bondi's team handed out Phase 1, people felt played. Sure, there were flag logs. Yes, there was a contact book with redacted masseuse lists. But the billion-dollar question? Still sealed. And that brings us back to the optics. Why release documents everyone has seen before while keeping the most damning ones out of sight? Why not let Congress, or at least an independent body, review the unredacted Treasury file? Wyden was blunt. Without transparency, the public is left to wonder if the DOJ is protecting powerful figures, intentionally or not. Let's zoom out for a moment. Epstein's story has always been about power. He collected it, he abused it, and he shielded himself with it. The same networks that gave him influence in New York and Palm Beach are now clouding the truth years after his death. And when the nation's top law enforcement office, led by Pam Bondi, filters that truth through layers of black ink, suspicion only grows. Consider how this appears to the victims. For them, this isn't politics. It's about justice. It's about understanding how their abuser could keep getting richer, keep flying across the world, and keep operating even after a sex crime conviction. Those financial wires hold answers. They show who funded Epstein's lifestyle and possibly who enabled his crimes. Every redaction, every withheld document is another barrier between survivors and the justice they deserve. And it's not just victims demanding answers. Oversight committees, journalists, and the public at large want to know how banks failed, how regulators ignored red flags, and how the Justice Department can say with a straight face that the money trail isn't relevant. Meanwhile, Bondi continues to defend the cautious release strategy, promising more phases will come. But the skepticism is overwhelming. Here's the unavoidable truth. The Epstein scandal didn't die with Epstein. His death left a vacuum filled with conspiracy theories, half-truths, and unanswered questions. And instead of putting those to rest, the DOJ's selective transparency has poured gasoline on the fire. Which brings us right back to the title of this story, Pam Bondi Exposed. Not because she openly admitted wrongdoing. However, because the act of hiding, keeping the most vital records under wraps, has become its own scandal. A scandal of omission. When history looks back at this chapter, it won't just ask how Epstein got away with it for so long. It will ask who held the files, who controlled the evidence, and who chose redaction over revelation. Pam Bondi promised transparency, $1 billion worth of shadows. Until those Treasury records are made public and the money trail is exposed, the American people will continue to ask the same question. What are they hiding? And maybe that's the most dangerous part of all. Because when truth is buried, suspicion takes its place. And suspicion has a way of turning silence into guilt.